Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Coming up tonight on Jenna Ellis Tonight, we are going to break down where Gen Z is in the mix of all of this. There's a fascinating new poll that you are going to want to hear about that a whopping 65% of Gen Zers think that politicians across the board are corrupt. Are they onto something? Christian Lasval from the Heritage Foundation will join us on that. And then Kevin McCullough has a great new op-ed talking about Donald Trump's upcoming VP pick. Nobody knows and no one will know who exactly that is until Donald Trump makes his decision. But I think that this is a really fascinating argument from Kevin on who it should be. Plus, we'll break down where Dr. Fauci was testifying in front of Congress today. All that you need to know, will he ever be actually held accountable? And of course, this is June, it's Pride Month. So Dr. Jeff Meyers from the Summit Ministries out in Colorado is going to come and talk about how the conservative and especially the Christian should approach Pride Month. All this and more on the Salem News Channel coming up 9 p.m. Eastern. Hi friends, Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis Tonight, and we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership and Bidenomics has been an utter disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a constant issue. High interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, and those have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even among the tensions. So there are so many reasons that Americans should consider wise investing and investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com, download the free investor guide, and I have read it. There is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is the time to not roll the dice on your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that is in gold and that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals and make sure to tell them that I sent you. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So since Thursday and that unprecedented verdict for Donald Trump convicting him of 34 felonies, which is an absolutely ridiculous case for a number of reasons, the world is still talking about whether it will get overturned on appeal. Can Trump pardon himself if he gets elected? Will he have jail time? All of these other legal questions. But really the issue is what happens toward November. Well, Gen Z is the biggest voting bloc, and a lot of Gen Zers are really questioning whether they want to engage in politics at all. Donald Trump, in the wake of that verdict, did create a TikTok account that went viral and already got so many views, but that also comes with Congress putting a ban on TikTok and wanting ByteDance to divest by January. So whether or not that ultimately has an impact on Gen Z remains to be seen. But this is a very interesting poll coming from Semaphore. This article says, in part, a dying empire led by bad people. Poll finds young voters despairing over U.S. politics. Young voters overwhelmingly believe that almost all politicians are corrupt and that the country will end up worse off than when they were born, according to new polling from Democratic firm Blueprint obtained exclusively by Semaphore. The sour mood points to potential trouble for Joe Biden, who is struggling with Gen Z and younger millennials in polls compared with 2020 and needs to convince them that he can be relied on to improve their lives. As part of the online poll of 943 18 to 30-year-old registered voters, Blueprint asked participants to respond to a series of questions about the American political system. 49% agreed to some extent that elections in the country don't represent people like them. 51% agreed to some extent that the political system in the U.S., quote, doesn't work for people like me. And 64% backed the statement that America is in decline. a whopping 65% agreed either strongly or somewhat that, quote, nearly all politicians are corrupt and make money from their political power. Only 7% disagreed. Christian Lasval is the social media content director for the Heritage Foundation, and he is a Gen Zer and one of my favorites. He joins me now. So this is a whopping 65%, and I think that Gen Z is absolutely right to question the corruption going on in Washington. So does this mean disengagement from the largest voting bloc that does include younger millennials, or where should Republicans and conservatives go from here?
I hope it doesn't mean disengagement, because if they're dissatisfied with the way things are going right now, their engagement is what's going to make the difference toward changing things and correcting course. But look, young people, although they may get a bad rap for getting a lot of things wrong, which we do, one thing they have right is that the American political system isn't really working for them, for the everyday average American. They see that whether they're graduating college or just maybe getting their first full-time job, maybe their second full-time job, first promotion, that the economy they had even just a few years ago isn't the same anymore. The America that their parents, that my parents grew up in, the things they were able to afford on one income, young people are seeing they probably won't be able to afford on two. Another poll from Gallup from back in March showed that 40% of the young demographic, ages 18 to 34, said that the economic problems are their number one concern. And again, we are young, but we don't have short-term memory. We know that just 3 years ago, maybe on a job that didn't pay as much as it does now, our paychecks were taking us further. We could purchase more things. Now we're going to the grocery store and buying the same things that we used to buy. And even though we may have gotten a pay raise, like I said, if you had a college job and now you're in your first full-time job, you're making more money, you're finding that the same groceries, you're not able to afford them the same as you were before. And so hopefully they're able to draw the connection that there was significant policy changes from 2021 to now, and draw the connection that it might have something to do with the guy living on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's a very high percentage that agree that America is in decline. Maybe that needs to be the Republican Party's message heading into 2024, rather than, of course, the Democrats are going to run on Trump is a convicted felon, and we've known this for a long time. I don't know that that message necessarily resonates with Gen Z, because that only impacts Donald Trump himself. What I'm hearing a lot of young people and people across the voting age spectrum are very concerned about is what impacts their own lives. And the economy and the border are I think the top two issues. And so where are conservatives at with really driving this message home come November, that, as you rightly said, Christian Lasval, it may have something to do with the current occupant of the White House?
Absolutely. At the Heritage Foundation, we are very big on reminding all Americans about three simple words: gas, groceries, and rent. And I think Republicans and conservatives at large would be wise to borrow the same terminology and remind Americans, remember what your gas, your groceries, and your rent cost just 3 years ago, and how much all the prices in all those three areas have gone up. And that's a direct result of Washington, D.C. spending all of the money that you earned, taking it from you, and blowing it on 7 electric chargers since the Infrastructure Act that Biden got through, when they passed billions of your tax dollars in order to do it. So they're taking all of this money from you, and it's yielding almost no results. Republicans and conservatives need to draw those connections for the American people so that they understand very clearly it's the financial struggles that you're facing, the inability to purchase a home, a car, to afford your groceries, your gas, and your rent, is directly tied to the spending increases because of inflation that were brought to you by the big spending here in Washington, D.C. And if you want that to change, you need to vote for politicians who are telling you and have a record of changing that spending trajectory so that these prices can come down. Otherwise, you shouldn't expect any change. And you can see on President Biden's side, he knows he's in trouble. They don't want to stop the spending, and so they're trying to buy young people's favor with these student loan bailouts, which I would remind young voters, it's just transferring the debt onto hardworking Americans, and eventually that person's going to be you. It may have a small benefit for you now, but it's added to your share of the national debt that you're going to have to pay in the long term anyway. Recently, the White House called on Congress to pass a $10,000 first-time home buyer tax credit. That's, again, another attempt to try and ease the financial burden on young voters. But if you have a home that you can use that tax credit, it hasn't passed. But if it does, and that tax credit benefits you now, what happens when you get married and have one kid and need another home? Guess what? the price of the homes are still going to go up and you don't get that tax credit anymore. So Biden's trying really hard to buy favor with young voters. But the fact of the matter is, he's not changing course with how he wants to spend. 2 or 3 days after tax day, Biden gave a speech on how he wants to increase taxes for next year and spend more for next year. If we keep that path, nothing's going to change. And conservatives need to remind young voters that, look, if you're looking for relief in your gas, in your groceries, in your rent, you got to go with fiscally responsible politicians, not the big Joe Biden type spenders.
Yeah, and that would include holding Republicans accountable as well, because a lot of them are very big spenders. But this is the same thing as just printing money. I mean, in the short term, it sounds great, but then inflation happens, and ultimately we all pay the price. And this is really the difference between freedom, liberty versus statism and globalism. I mean, I don't think that this is an accident that Joe Biden is implementing these policies, because that is the progressive left. They want to make conservatives and all of the American people, they want people to be dependent on government. They don't want you to be able to afford your own home. They want you to not be property owners, to have as much freedom and liberty, so that you take these type of government handouts and we have bigger and bigger government instead of less and less government and more freedom. So this is really a clash of ideology. It isn't so much about just Trump versus Biden and some of those personality clashes. This comes down ultimately to the way that we view government and political philosophy. And so this is where I appreciate what the Heritage Foundation does, that reminds people to be truly conservative on these topics and to look at these as voting on the issues, not just voting for a person or a personality, whether you love or hate Trump or Biden. This is all about policy, right?
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a very important point that would also be beneficial for conservatives to remind their voting bases about. This is the choice between dependence or independence. On the left, you have increased government spending to tie you down to government programs where government has to be involved in every decision in your life, and you don't get to keep the fruits of your own labor to make the decisions that would be best for you and for your family. And on the right, you have independence, which for a young person ought to be very appealing. We're getting out of college, we're getting our first jobs, we want to build our own families, we're trying to grow in our careers. You can't do that well if you can't afford your groceries. You can't do that well if you're having a hard time keeping a roof over your head. All the dreams, the visions that you may have as a young person, America's supposed to be the place where you can pursue and achieve those dreams. That's not possible if you don't have enough money after the government's finished sucking your resources dry to pursue those dreams. So the conservatives have a very appealing message to send that, look, if you want to be able to keep the fruits of your labor and accomplish the dreams that you have for yourself and your family and the future of this country, you're going to want to support fiscally responsible candidates who are going to let you keep the fruits of that labor so that you can achieve the American dream.
Yeah, the American dream was never, I want to be more and more dependent on government when I grow up. I mean, there's literally nobody that says that. And yet it's so wild to me that some of these, like the Free Palestine protesters on university campuses and all of these liberals that are, the purple-haired LGBTQ plus, whatever, they buy into this nonsense that they have to be more and more dependent on government, and that equals more and more identity and recognition. But they're selling out their policy without understanding that they will become dependents for the rest of their lives. And so in just the last minute we have with you, Christian Lasval, I mean, what is the primary message to young voters to say, listen, you don't want to wait until you're 40, 50, 60 to become a conservative. You need to understand that the time is now and vote for these policies before you recognize how much they're harmful to you.
I would tell them to look at the people in their life that they look up to, that have achieved financial success, that have the families that they're aspiring to have. Look at what they were able to accomplish and tell yourself the direction that the country's moving in right now, the fiscal course that the United States finds itself right now, will that even be possible for me if we continue on that trajectory? And if you find that actually, no, if we keep spending the way we're spending and being taxed the way we are now, that won't be possible for me. Use that as a motivator to vote for the candidates who will change that course.
Well said. America is in decline. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Well, friends, you might have heard that Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of their box stores or shopping channels the way that they used to. They've been part of this cancel culture, so they want to pass along the savings directly to you by having a $25 extravaganza. I love that word, extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just a one-product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products, some you may not even know about. To get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out their $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use My Pillows are just $25. My Pillow sandals, also awesome, only $25. Their 6-pack towel sets are $25. And brand new 4-pack dish towels, you guessed it, just $25. For the first time ever, the premium My Pillows with the all-new Giza fabric, just $25. And orders over $75 will receive free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long. Go to mypillow.com, use the promo code Jenna, or call 800-564-8475 today. That's 800-564-8475, or go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Jenna. So as we head closer and closer to November, the question still remains, who will Donald Trump pick as his VP? So having been in Trump world and knowing how Donald Trump makes his decisions, which nobody ever really knows, we just sort of wait until he announces them, which is how it happens, is that Donald Trump always leaves all of the options on the table until he makes a decision. And he always gets meaningful input from literally anyone that he prefers to ask. And I've been there in the room when he's on the phone in multiple situations, a variety of issues, and he loves to ask almost anyone what they think he should do. And so he is likely asking a lot of different people what they think about who he should nominate for vice president. And so I came across this article from Town Hall that simply had an amazing headline: "The Trump VP will be ... The author of that piece, Kevin McCullough, host of That Kevin Show, joins me now. And Kevin, I actually thought you had a very brilliant take on this, and I hope that this piece comes to the desk of Donald Trump, because I think he needs to read your argument. So without spoiling the ... and what comes after, what's your argument for who should be VP?
Let me make it perfectly clear that I don't know who Donald Trump's going to pick any more than you do, and I know that he will ultimately be the decision maker and say, this is who I want, and he'll have reasons for why he wants to go that direction. I'm confident of that. But I have been kind of mulling this over in my head for a few weeks, and a number of, probably 2.5 months ago, in an aside, in a conversation, he said, wouldn't it be great to take New York away from the Democrats? It was just a throwaway line. It wasn't even something that a lot of people even reported on. And since that time, I have watched eagerly with this entire thing in my mind about how would he go about doing that. Well, he was chained to a desk for 6 weeks, so he's obviously spent a lot of time here over the last couple of months. And he held that huge rally in the Bronx, and there was, a lot of people that turned out, a lot more people turned out than what the media had anticipated. And then when the trial was over, he convenes this kind of council of advisors, if you will. They were titans of industry. He invites them to a private dinner, and he asks each of them point blank, who do you think I should pick? And this just happened on Thursday night, the very same night that the verdict, tells you how little he cared about the verdict. Like, he just went straight back to the campaign. It was like, that's it. But he asks these people in kind of round robin fashion, who do you think it should be? And one person said Tim Scott, and a couple of people said Governor Burgum from North Dakota. And the consensus in the room was Nikki Haley. And I think for a lot of reasons, I think for a lot of reasons, people think Nikki Haley is the obvious choice. And I think that these people are not necessarily that politically attuned. But the argument in the room that night was, but she got all those votes that you didn't get in the primary. And so you need to consolidate your base. And I think that the way the president thinks about this is she didn't really consolidate my base. She went and got crossover voters in New Hampshire and other open primary states that came and voted for her in pretty good number, but they didn't really have anything to vote for on the Democratic side. And a lot of those people, once she hitches her wagon to his train, there is not going to be the independent Nikki Haley anymore. They're gonna pillory her. They're gonna say she's a Trump acolyte. They're gonna be as mean and as tawdry towards her as they are towards him. So I don't anticipate that Nikki Haley is going to bring in a whole swath of voters. So what does he do with the vice presidential pick? Vice presidents matter. Kamala Harris is a heartbeat away from running the entire world, and I think the entire nation's scared to death of that. Nikki Haley would be an improvement over that.
If they're not, yeah. Yeah.
Nikki Haley would be a definitive improvement over that. She ran a state successfully for 2 terms. But here's I think a different way to think about this, and that is, who can you put on the ticket that expands the map and does what he said in that throwaway soundbite, takes New York from the Democrats? Well, 1 year after Donald Trump lost New York State by 23 points in 2020 to Joe Biden, Lee Zeldin, congressman, defender of Trump on the Intelligence Committee, defender of Trump on the other Judiciary Committee, talented lawyer, reservist, active colonel in the reserves for the U.S. Army, has been on multiple tours of duty, married a Hispanic wife, has a beautiful family, squeaky clean in terms of reputation, kind of a Mike Pence, but with a more MAGA approach in terms of how kind of stellar his record is. And he's really popular. Like, New York almost elected him governor the year after January 6th. Think about that. In the same calendar year that January 6th happened, they nearly put Lee Zeldin in the governor's house in Albany. Well, how did he do that? He built a statewide, county by county organization that worked very hard on making clear the America First principles to New York voters. And the stuff in New York's bad enough that they looked at it and they almost said, yeah, we want that. So what would happen if he put Lee Zeldin on the ticket? Well, they don't even have to win, really. All you have to do is keep the polling close up through November 5th, and that means Biden has to spend a lot of money in New York City, the most expensive media market that he'd prefer not to spend money in. He'd rather spend that money in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, but you're going to make him spend it to defend his, quote, home turf, California and New York kind of being the home states for Democrats, Texas and Florida kind of being proverbially the home states for Republicans. If you take New York off the board early on election night, it's going to be a rout for Donald Trump across the country. And I think that putting Lee Zeldin in at the VP brings that closer to happening for one last reason. Following the verdict, a new round of polling came out. Emerson College has Trump down only 7 to Biden in New York State. If you figure the margin of error in there, he could be as close as 3 points behind. It's a razor thin margin for what should be a safe state for the Democrats.
Yeah, well, I love this argument, Kevin, because it goes on the offensive instead of just playing defensive. And the Democrats for a long time have targeted really red states like Texas and Florida that have a huge electoral college delegate count. And if Trump could do something like this, really make the Democrats defend the turf that they take for granted, then maybe we would start making some headway instead of constantly defending. And so I love this. Instead of just saying, well, we need to make sure that our base coalesces, actually go after some of the Democrat base voters. I mean, that's what Donald Trump was doing, as you mentioned, by going to the Bronx, going after the Black vote, going after the Hispanic vote. I mean, people that demographically have traditionally voted Democrat, by saying, hey, maybe you need to consider a better alternative. So I think you're right that we won't know who his VP pick until he makes a decision. I don't think he's even made a decision yet, just kind of knowing how he works. And he's going to ask everybody's opinion, even people who you and I might think, well, why would they weigh in on it? He asked me questions on issues that I thought, why does he want my opinion on this? But that's part of the reason, actually, that he is so popular, is that he asks a wide swath of people for their opinions. And I really, like I said, hope that this op-ed comes to his desk. And in just the last minute that we have here, how do you think that the Democrats would actually have to respond then if somebody like Lee Zeldin was the VP pick?
Well, it puts a dagger right through the heart of the campaign. If they have to defend New York stem to stern, they're not going to be able to wage the swing state wars that they want to wage. And in a campaign cycle where they're already behind on messaging, I mean, they're trying to make abortion and LGBTQ and other things their primary, priorities. Trump's got them beaten on the economy, on immigration, on a number of things that actually touch the pocketbook and heart of the American family. having to divert resources to New York is not a good look.
Yeah, and they're going to have to message on only Trump is a convicted felon. And if they actually have to defend their turf instead of project, then maybe, again, we'll make some headway. So, Kevin McCullough, really appreciate it. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Hi friends, Jenna Ellis, host of Jenna Ellis Tonight, and we are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been an utter disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a constant issue. High interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market. There have been major bank failures, and many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, and those have the potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even among the tensions. So there are so many reasons that Americans should consider wise investing, and investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero hassle, education first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. Go to legacypminvestments.com, download the free investor guide, and I have read it. There is so much valuable information there. Friends, now is the time to not roll the dice on your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that is in gold and that gold offers you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals and make sure to tell them that I sent you. We're back with Kevin McCullough on another top trending story today. Dr. Fauci, again before Congress, and has actually admitted that he simply made up a lot of the COVID restrictions and masking children and the 6-foot distancing. And yet the Democrats are still defending his nonsense. Kevin, I think you and I both agree that Fauci deserves accountability, probably jail time. But where are the Republican attorneys general that are like Andrew Bailey out of Missouri that are actually bringing lawsuits? And this isn't just lawfare, but actual accountability against Fauci. When will we see more Republicans stand up and do more than just these strongly worded letters or statements from Congress?
You know, someone who's wanted to do that for quite some time is Senator Rand Paul, and I think that if he has his way, he will see Fauci behind bars at some point. I think when the book is finally closed on the COVID era and what happened here, it's going to be so filled with shameful behavior from Fauci in terms of the final record. And it's really kind of a footnote of his entire career. You know, RFK Jr. wrote a book about Fauci's experience during the AIDS crisis. And instead, like the COVID crisis, instead of pursuing therapeutics and things that would help people deal with and be able to engage natural immunity and begin to work on things that would help extend life for them, he had this fascinating desire to create vaccines. And not to be confused about it, he was heavily invested in the companies that produced the vaccines. And in the AIDS situation, the vaccines failed miserably. In the COVID situation, they delayed symptoms and made some symptoms less severe, but he used his position in government to enforce a policy that enriched him while killing millions of Americans. He also went to Congress and lied about gain of function. He lied openly to their face. And the fact that he's finally standing accountable for some of these bad behaviors is far too little justice, and it's far too late. Should have happened a long time ago. I'm just thankful that we are finally getting some reckoning, and I hope that there will be severe criminal penalties for what he's done. He abused his power. He abused his position, and Americans died because of it.
And thankfully, we're at least seeing the response and some measure of accountability with the fact that he's at least gone now from the NIH and hasn't come back to have that kind of influence that he had in 2020. And this is where, just as a conservative, I disagree with how the COVID task force under the Trump administration that was led by Mike Pence, of course. I mean, that was an utter disaster, but that was mainly Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, and they didn't listen to some of the others. But then how Joe Biden just weaponized that when he went into office with all of these mandates that thankfully were struck down, like the OSHA mandate at the US Supreme Court. But this should have happened, this type of accountability should have happened way back with the AIDS type of response. And if we had had accountability back then like we have now, Fauci wouldn't have even been present to address the COVID situation. So doesn't this just underscore why we need to drain the swamp?
Well, we have a fundamental problem in public health, and I have a lot of doctors on my show on a regular basis, and to a person, every one of them, and they don't generally tend to identify as left-right. They are committed to science, and they want to see what the science says. But their issue with this entire segment of history was that there was almost no science involved in the decision making. And at the end of the day, yes, it did start on Trump and Pence's watch. But at the end of the day, they were caught as flat-footed as the rest of the world was by what had happened here. And it took some time to delve into the investigations and find out the real truth of it, some of which Dr. Fauci knew from the beginning. In fact, most of the COVID history, Fauci was privy to while he was advising the administration on policy that he claimed kind of unique knowledge about. So when he's saying, the WHO and the Chinese are not doing this, they're doing that, they were trusting his expert position and testimony to guide them properly. And who would they have brought in that could have told them otherwise?
Well, they did bring in Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Atlas, and some of those, but I really blame Mike Pence for a lot of this because he was the appointed head. But we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much, Kevin. We'll be right back with more. Well, if you've been living in the Western world and paying any modicum of attention over the last decade, you have seen increasing hostility of the left trying to force their LGBTQ ideology and this rainbow mafia Marxism on our culture in an increasingly desperate manner. And so we are in the midst of June, which of course is Pride Month to those who not only celebrate themselves, but are trying to compel everyday ordinary Americans and specifically conservatives and of course Christians to buy into their nonsense. And if we don't use their preferred pronouns, if we don't agree that there are 75 or 20 zillion different genders, then somehow we're bigoted, we're hate-filled, and we don't love, even though love really does mean telling the truth. So this article came from CNN, and the headline is, "If your kid just told you they're trans, here's what you should know." And word to the wise, by the way, don't ever take any parenting advice from CNN. But let's read this headline. Mary Hope Holland gave birth to a baby she thought was a boy. But at 6 years old, the child asked her questions such as, "Mom, am I a boy? How do you know I'm a boy?" So this mom then says, according to CNN, "Once I clued in, I said, the doctors make the best guess based on your body, but only you can know. And we love you no matter what," said Holland, now the co-lead for the Families United for Trans Rights, an organization of transgender kids and their loved ones. Joining me now is Jeff Meyers, who is the president of Summit Ministries. And Jeff, what's going to happen when this mother's child, who's a 6-year-old, comes and says, "Mommy, how do I know that I'm human?" Is she going to say, "Well, the doctors made their best guess based on your body, but who knows? You might be a dinosaur, you might be a cucumber. It just all depends on how you feel." I mean, this is utter nonsense, but this is the degeneration and the rapid de-escalation of rationality and truth-based objectivity in society.
And parents deciding that it can go ahead and insert their progressive political agenda into the minds and hearts of their children. It's a form of abuse, and everybody knows this at this point. The CAST report just came out last month. The WPATH reports came out in March. Hundreds of pages of data documenting that the entire approach to medicalizing the transgender issue is wrong and that it hurts children. So now everybody knows this, that CNN would write an article like this at this time time means that they are not ignorant of the facts of the situation. They are pursuing a particular political viewpoint in spite of the facts.
And this is, again, why we all have to be smart consumers of news. And what do you say, Jeff? Because Summit Ministries is all about worldviews and helping particularly college age students or those going into college how to not only understand their own worldview and the truth, but how to identify a worldview of the left or cultural Marxism. So, what do you say when a student comes to you and says, well, but that's not really loving? I mean, I want to embrace and affirm anyone, even though maybe I'm not an LGBTQ affirming person or identifying myself, I don't want to tell someone else that that's bad for them.
Right. Well, there are three layers to this. First of all, you always want to be kind. You want to instruct your opponents with gentleness. Perhaps God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, so that they may escape from the trap of the devil who has taken them captive to do his will. That's what Paul said to his protege Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 2. So kindness for sure. But is it loving to let someone persist in an ideology that is going to lead them toward a self-destructive life? We wouldn't apply that to any other situation. If someone came to you and said, I'm addicted to drugs and you need to love me by letting me continue this destruction of myself, you wouldn't allow yourself to think that you're being compassionate if you took that approach. Why would we take it with this issue? Because sexuality is now the new dominant ideology. It's the basis of a lot of people's worldview. I would teach my students to begin asking questions. The core question, if someone is transgender especially, is what happened to you that causes you to see yourself the way you do? In virtually every situation that I have faced, and it's a bunch, that question has led to the unveiling of some kind of a childhood trauma. It could have been a sexual abuse or some other kind of abuse or a death of a loved one or a divorce in the family, something that caused a childhood trauma that goes to the very core of how that child sees him or herself. So you begin with that, and then you recognize that these conversations are going to be tough, and you talk about the fact that they're tough. Say, look, we got to have an honest conversation here because love doesn't mean we just go along. I mean, I'm a married guy. I want unity with my wife. That unity is not easy. We have to fight for it. That is true in friendships as well.
Yeah, and loving someone doesn't just simply mean affirming all of their choices. It means giving them sound advice based on the truth, and objective truth can only come from the person of God and rational morality. But it seems like we've completely lost this ethic. And as you mentioned earlier, Jeff, all of these studies now that are saying that all of this trans nonsense is actually harmful for children. We are going to be faced with a society. I mean, I think of this little 6-year-old. I mean, I don't know how old that child is now, but if their parents have persisted in essentially forcing them into a trans lifestyle, just because kids ask questions all the time about reality, and we should say, yeah, here's the truth. But if this child is forced into a trans nonsense, like so many really, really young kids are, we are going to be faced with a society very shortly with a lot of young people that are coming out of this ideology. They're seeing the truth, and they will have permanent physical and also mental health, spiritual scars from this. How do we even begin to deal with something like this as the church and as a conservative society?
Well, this is the time for the church to step up. There's no question about that. In this particular case, the biological reality and the theological reality are one and the same. We need to proclaim what Genesis says and what Jesus affirmed, that God made them male and female. It's not just external sex characteristics. There's 6,500 biological differences between males and females. And these result in all kinds of differences. So men and women are not interchangeable. They're to harmonize together, but not interchangeable. If we can reclaim that as a church and teach in a spirit of love, but a firm adherence to truth, then I think we can start to see this change. I certainly see it with the young adults I work with. I begin with respect, actually. We live in a culture where men don't respect women and women do not respect men. Let's begin with respect. One of our students at Summit Ministries gave a testimony I just thought was fantastic. She said, "You know, at Summit, it was the first time in my life where all of the boys around me wanted nothing from me except to be more like Jesus." That is the ethic
Mm.
that we need to be promoting in the church. And we begin with our children, helping them understand the wonderful differences between boys and girls.
Yeah, and wouldn't that be such a wonderful society if we all were respecting each other, not just affirming, but really, and not wanting for ourselves just affirmation and me, and all of this influence. I mean, all of these young people, all they want is to have followers and for people to look to them and really be envious of their lifestyle, and instead say, how can we truly serve others as Jesus called us to do? And so, Jeff, I want to hold you over into the next segment. That's okay, because I think there's a lot more to unpack here about how the conservative Christian needs to respond to Pride Month. I mean, I'm here in the state of Florida where thankfully I haven't seen actually a whole lot, as much as I did in my former home state of Colorado, where you are. But so much of this is being foisted on our culture. So if you can hang on into the next segment, then I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that. But some closing thoughts real quick while we have just about a minute left here on just how students in particular need to be shaped in terms of worldview.
It's extremely significant for Christian young people to understand that their Christian worldview is not just about their personal salvation. What is your salvation for? It is for everything. It is for the world. It is the opportunity for you to be a different kind of person so you bear the fruit of the Spirit and bring blessing and flourishing to everybody around you. That's a huge paradigm shift, and one that young adults desperately need in a time when they're significantly lacking a sense of purpose in life.
Yeah, and they're significantly lacking the truth. So we'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis tonight as we face some of these difficult questions and how we should respond to Pride Month. I'm back with Jeff Meyers, who is the president of Summit Ministries. And you can, if you have a high school or college age student and you want to teach them about worldviews, go to summit.org. And it's a wonderful, wonderful ministry, 2-week long program. I'm actually a graduate of Summit Ministries. I went through that at the age of 16. And Jeff, my testimony coming out of Summit is that that was a place where I could ask all of my questions about the truth of the Bible, about what's going on in culture, and what answers do Christians have? Because in the church, we say, we have the best explanation for the reality to which we are presented, because we all deal with life's most important questions. Is there a God? Who is God? What is my purpose? Am I created for something more? I mean, now we have all of these questions, how do I know that I'm a woman? Am I a woman? How do I know that I'm not a dinosaur? I mean, all of these other questions that even when I was going through Summit, we didn't have those types of questions. I mean, that was just understood as self-evident reality. But in facing the broader issue, I think, of what Pride Month is trying to foist upon our culture, we have to go on the offensive as truth tellers and simply say, yes, there are answers for your questions. And we may not know the answers to everything, but we do have the answers that God gives us and that the truth of reality shows us. I mean, there is self-evident truth.
You've used the word reality several times, and that's really key. John 8:32, that Jesus said, if you follow my teachings, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The Greek word for truth there is reality. It is through the teachings of Jesus that we come to understand reality as it actually is, and that sets us free. That's a message that everybody wants to hear because people today feel burdened by so many things. The young adults I work with, 75% of them say they do not have a sense of purpose that gives meaning to their lives. More than 50% say they aren't sure or clear about whether truth actually exists and can be discovered. More than 50% say they struggle with anxiety and depression. I don't think those statistics are unrelated. There is a causation that happens when you give up on the idea of truth, and then you give up on the idea that reality is knowable. And as soon as you do that, the most natural reaction is to just protect yourself. right? To focus in on yourself, to stop focusing on blessing and serving other people and start just thinking about yourself all of the time. You stop taking risks because why would you take a risk? You could end up worse as well as you could end up better. Nobody can ever know because reality is not knowable. I think we've got a generation that's primed to understand the truth, but it's not going to be easy because they've been so indoctrinated by so many, especially leftist progressive viewpoints.
Yeah, and we've also have this wide swath of conservatives, Jeff, that are trying to decouple the truth from faith-based biblical Christianity, and understanding that that they want to have all of these policies, all of these other worldviews, and these moral premises that really aren't grounded on anything other than, in their view, the social contract theory or man's collective will to say, this is what we say the measurable differences between right and wrong, good and evil. And if we are teaching truth and we are standing up and advocating for a self-evident reality, we can't divorce truth and fact from the Word of God and from this being ultimately grounded in the Christian worldview.
Certainly, there are coalitions that can be made with people. We have some issues where we stand with atheists. We have some issues where we stand with secular Jews. We have some issues like on the transgender issue that we've been discussing. We actually have lesbian feminists who stand with us because they believe that approach to transgender in this country hurts children. It mutilates them. It destroys their lives. So certainly we can walk in alignment with people who don't understand that Jesus is the path to understanding reality. But that doesn't change the fact of it. I'm not a Christian believer because I just hope that this is somehow true. The factual basis of a biblical worldview is well established. There is a God, and everybody knows that through science as well as through just observing the world around them. And we know, as a matter of fact, that Jesus actually did rise from the dead. It's the single most provable fact from ancient history. So this is not a situation where Christians should step back and say, well, whatever's true for you is true for you. That is not the case. Usually you engage through questions. How do you know that? What do you mean by that? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Those kinds of things are usually the best approach, but this is not a time to step back.
Yeah, so well said. And I think that we as conservatives and especially as Christians could engage Pride Month better by asking those exact questions and standing up for truth and actually making the left confront what do they actually think, because they're putting forward all of this ideology, but do they actually understand that? And you're so right, Jeff. I'm not a Christian just because I have a hope and a belief like someone like a child would in Santa Claus. It's because the Christian worldview is the best explanation for the reality to which I'm presented, and looking at the Bible, those are the correct answers. So thanks so much, Jeff. That's all the time we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. See you tomorrow night.